basically two things can be true at the same time. We can sit there and identify the location on the physical brain, but that you're saying that doesn't actually tell the whole story of what's going on with thought, dream,
Oh, absolutely.
consciousness. Okay.
Absolutely, yes. Again, there's a correlation, but not an identity. And there's so much under what you said that we could unpack in terms of, I think,
Let's do it.
Well, okay. Well, let me get before our minds a more robust understanding of the soul and its relationship to the body. I want you to think about, in fact, I've got a picture I'm going to share. Think about a Ferris wheel, and it's got 8 cars.
Thank you so much for coming on the program. Really appreciate you taking the time to do so. And I'm really interested in this conversation that we're going to have around your recent book called Have We Lost Our Minds? My understanding of this is basically that you're both sort of debunking neurotheology, but you're also making an affirmative case in answer to the huge primary question, what is a human? Which I think is extremely interesting, extremely relevant. I don't know if there's a different direction you want to go right out of the gate here, but that's the first question I have for you is, what is a human?
Sure. Appreciate getting a chance to talk about these issues, very important issues. The way to start it, let me make sure I'm good here, that you can hear me.
That's perfect.
The way to start the conversation is really to say, well, does the scripture have anything to say about that? And then does philosophy have anything to say about that? The other area that deals with the ultimate question of what are we? And according to scripture, there are 4 things that can be said. We're certainly a body that's valuable. We also are a soul that's valuable. The 2 are deeply united, which has a lot of implications, as opposed to other views of a much more superficial connection. And then fourthly, it is the soul that lives past the death of the body and awaits the final resurrection of the body. So most fundamentally, we're a soul that has a body, but that is not to take away from the deep unity and naturalness of us being embodied and then live in that way. So that's the short answer from theology. And then philosophically, there are very good arguments in support, and everything from the inability of pure material things, including brains, to explain rationality, or to explain freedom, or to explain what's called first-person perspectives, that I'm aware of my inner life in a way that no neuroscientist ever could be, and that's why they have to ask me what I'm feeling when they open up my cranium, right? Or what I'm experiencing. And then there's the argument from our unity at a time. It's what physicalists have a hard time explaining. It's called the binding problem, that there are all these disparate experiences I'm having right now as I'm having visual experiences, I'm hearing things, I'm feeling the temperature, and somehow they're all one unified experience. And the best way to explain that is there's a unifying soul that unifies all those different sense experiences. And then the last is our unity over time. The fact that I was born and I will enjoy my retirement, and I will be in a disembodied state after my body dies. So I'm that thing that stands under all these changes over my lifetime. So I try to unpack some of those in the book, and then critique some of the errors that are made by the neurotheologians that leads him to, I believe, a different conclusion of what we are, namely a more materialistic view.
I basically wanted to play devil's advocate for a moment just to kind of tease this out. And I was curious what your response would be to someone who says, you know, the feeling of self is, you know, an evolutionary adapted mechanism that helps us feel like we have meaning or feel like we have individuality, but is actually explained totally based on the matter and the mechanisms at a neurological level in the brain. And you also mentioned, I think you mentioned freedom. You mentioned the first person POV that we have. You kind of listed a number of things there, and I just want to make sure that someone who maybe has an alternative explanation to some of those things doesn't just write off the rest of it by going, oh, he said that, but I know I have an alternative that fully explains those. Can we kind of go into some of those things just before we get farther down the road, in order for you to say, you know, here's the problem with explaining this on a total physicalist paradigm.
Sure, absolutely. So, and this is the assumption I think the neurotheologians make that is wrong. There is data, increasingly sophisticated data, that there are correlations between our brain states and our mental states. So we can correlate the neural events in a certain part of the brain with this thought or this belief or desire, and that's uncontroversial. There are clearly these correlations. The question is, are they identical? Are because those things correlate, does that mean really that the mental event is nothing but or reducible to that neural event? That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns on the nature of identity. Uh, and a lot of people just assume, well, if they're correlated, they must be the same. Well, not so fast. There's a lot of things that are correlated that always come together, but they're not identical. Every time I look in the mirror, I see my image, but I'm not the identical. I'm not identical to that image. I'm not the same as that. I'm a different entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So correlation doesn't necessarily mean identity. It might, but it doesn't necessarily. And how do we decide? Well, we decide by applying the law of identity. There's a law of logic that helps us determine when two things that come together are really the same thing, or when they're actually different things that might in some way correlate to one another. Here's the illustration I give in my book. Let's say you've got a daughter and she has a goldfish she loves. She creatively named him Gil. And every day when she comes home from school, she runs upstairs and greets Gil. So one day she's away at school. You notice Gil floating on top of the water, dead as can be. So you right away bury Gil in the right way and run to the pet store and pick out one that's just like Gil. Okay. And bring him home, put him in the tank just in time for your daughter to get home. So as she always does, she runs upstairs and within seconds you hear her sobbing. And you know you failed
Mm.
because she has applied the law of identity, which says that if something is identical to itself, it's going to share every characteristic in common. And she noticed one thing different of Gil too that wasn't true of Gil. She knew him so well. Maybe the mouth was shaped a little differently and you didn't notice, or the color was a little bit different and you didn't notice, right? So there was some property different from Gil 2 to Gil 1. She applied the law of identity and said, well, since there's different properties of this goldfish, this can't be, doesn't just happen not to be. It necessarily is not Gil. So she was devastated. So that's the law of identity. If two things are identical, they're going to share every property in common. And so if you can show there's one property true of the brain, not true of the mind, or true of the mind, not true of the brain, they necessarily can't be identical. They don't just happen to not be. They can't be.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what these things that I mentioned are that physicalists have for a long time tried to explain can be the result of matter, and there to date haven't been any successful attempts. So let's take rationality. The reasoning ability is by definition not determined. It is something that I say, okay, I looked at different options. I didn't have to come down here, but the evidence was so strong, I did. And I can give you my reasons. I can give you my non-causal factors, uh, and then list out the different data points that lead you to that conclusion. So none of that is determined causally. However, any brain event is by definition determined causally because it is beholden to the laws of physics and chemistry. So they can't be identical because the reasoning has a property that the brain event doesn't. Same can be true as freedom, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the argument really ultimately lies in those properties of the mind that are not true of the property of the brain, is getting clear on the nature of identity and seeing that essentially necessarily they can't be the same. I'll give you one more example.
Mm-hmm.
And this relates to the first person subjectivity. So think about a woman who is the leading expert in audiology. So my wife's an audiologist. I kind of get what they do. And this woman knows everything there is to know scientifically about the process of hearing. Okay. There's no more knowledge out there. We're just positing she has full knowledge of the scientific data.
Hmm.
Uh, but she's deaf. She can't hear. And then lo and behold, she wakes up one morning and she can hear. She hears birds chirping. She hears her dog barking. And the question is, does she know anything new? Does she know anything more about hearing? I'd say it's pretty obvious she does. Namely, she knows what it's like to hear. She has a
Hmm.
first person experience of hearing a sound, which is qualitatively different than the data she had of what the process of hearing is. In other words, there's a first
Hmm.
person perspective that can't be reduced to a third person perspective. This is why
Hmm.
neurosurgeons can be doing brain surgery and touch a part of the brain with an electrode, and they know what's going on in the brain, but they have to ask the patient, so now what are you thinking? Or now what are you feeling? Or now, right? They've got to ask for that
Hmm.
first person perspective that they know a lot more about what's going on in the brain than the patient does because they're in there. But they have to ask, what are you experiencing? What's your first personality that I can't know? So there's clearly a
Hmm.
difference between this first person awareness and the neural facts that can be known
Hmm.
third person by somebody with the requisite training and expertise.
This is so interesting because I'm even thinking about the conversation that we're having now. And as we talk back and forth,
Yeah.
we're both aware of the fact that there's something different happening as you relay
Mm,
sensical sentences to me, and I understand information through
yeah.
language, and my brain processes that and takes it in, and there's a meaning that is derived, as opposed to if all of a sudden in the middle of your paragraph there you started going gobbity gookity bobbity book, then physically the exact same thing would have happened, right? An
Right.
audio wave would have gone, the bones in my ears would have vibrated. But what is the difference between the transmission of language, thought, information, and the raw material vibration going
Right.
into my brain? That's
Right.
another interesting. It's almost, is this a good analogy? Almost the difference between like thinking of a computer and you have the hardware and you have the software, where in communication the hardware is doing the same thing. There's a sending and a receiving, but in terms of what that software is made up of, it's either broken code if you're just going bibbity bobbity boo, or there's actually a correct language that's going across the way. But then what's the, I guess, physically identical, it seems, in terms of the mechanism, but then totally different in terms of, so what is the software? Is hardware software a good way of thinking about humans? Like, what is the software component of what a human is? As I guess my first question, and then if I can add one other thing to that, is I also sense that that's a bit reductive in that there's also personhood, which a
Yeah.
computer doesn't have. But even just the software hardware thing is sticking out to me. So, anyways,
Yeah.
all of that just to
Good.
tee you up. Yeah.
Good. Yes. Uh, like analogies of all sorts, that breaks down at some point. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think you can get some sense with the hardware software nuance or distinction. The illustration I use is a CD player.
Hmm.
So sounds are recorded as digital you know etchings in a CD. The sound is not identical to that, but that codifies that into a physical structure, into the grooves of a CD. You put
Hmm.
that in a CD player, and if the CD player is functioning as it should, the laser is able uh, to take those recordings and translate those into or back into sounds. Okay.
Hmm.
So the sound is that which existed before the encoding, and after it's played, it isn't identical with that, but it's correlated with that encoding in the CD that then the recorder can de-encode, can get out of it. And that's the soul of the CD player, that it takes those recordings, those correlations to sounds in this case, that are in the brain, and it can then extract the sound to hear. So hearing
Hmm.
ultimately turns out to be a function of the soul, but it uses the brain just like the CD player uses the etching in the CD to to have access to the sound.
And are you saying then that the primary mistake that is being made is people are, as we learn more about, oh, look at this area of the brain is lighting up when a person wants
Yeah,
to, move their foot, or
right.
look at this area of the brain is responsible for dreaming, et cetera, that as we kind of hone in on the mapping of what's happening mechanistically, we're still only presenting half of the equation. uh, Basically, two things can be true at the same time. We can sit there and identify the location on the physical brain, but that you're saying that doesn't actually tell the whole story of what's going on with thought,
Oh,
dream,
absolutely.
consciousness. Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Again, there's a correlation, but not an identity. Uh, and there's so much under what you said that we could unpack in terms of, I think,
Let's do
some,
it.
well, okay. Okay. Well, let me get before our minds a more robust understanding of the soul and its
Okay.
relationship to the body.
Yep.
And then that will help, I think, to say these different views are emphasizing different aspects here, some that are more true than others. Okay.
Awesome.
So I'm gonna give you an analogy, and this is sort of an example of what Dallas Willard is talking about, of how we need to have more and more rigorous understandings of the soul and soul body relation. And so this is a little bit of, okay, here's what that might look like. So I want you to think about, in fact, I've got a picture I'm going to share. Think about a Ferris wheel. Okay. See if I pull this picture up. All right. So here's a Ferris wheel, right? And it's got 8 cars, right? Well, you're the operator, and you're filling it up, and you've got groups of 4 or 5 people who know each other, and so you put them in one car, and then you put the 5 people who are friends in the next car, and you finally fill it all up with different groups of people. And the cars are, as you see, small enough that people are just face to face. They engage one another, have conversations, and then the cars are close enough to one another they can talk to people in other cars and engage them, right? So the ride starts, Ferris wheel goes, everybody's having a great time. So, got that picture kind of in your mind?
Yep.
Now, that's a picture of the soul and its capacities and faculties. Each of these cars represents a what's called a faculty of the soul, or a dimension of the soul. Okay, it's a set of abilities we have that are kind of grouped together because they're very similar. And those things that are in the cars are our capacities or our abilities. And there are 6 different cars in our soul. This picture is 8. Couldn't find one with 6, but there's 6 cars in our essential nature that are grouped together because they have similarities to one another and they're distinct from others, but they causally affect one another. I'll give you some, outline these and give you some examples.
Mm.
So let's say the first car is the mental faculty. All right. This has got 6 people in it, 6 different capacities or abilities that are all grouped together in this mental faculty. That's
Mm-hmm.
the ability to have thoughts, the capacity to have thoughts, which is the content of conscious states. Those are propositions, what our conscious states are about, that we can express in sentences. That's what a thought is. They also have beliefs, another capacity in this car or this faculty of soul. Beliefs are those propositions we take to be true in varying degrees of certainty. We're 51% or we're 99%. Thirdly, is the capacity to reason, the ability to relate those propositions via the laws of logic in order to discover truth. Fourth, there's imagination, the ability to put myself in a situation I'm not currently in, to imagine what that would be like. And lastly, there's desires. Now, these are inclinations to have or avoid certain experiences that I can imagine. So notice something about each of these 5 capacities in our mental faculty of the soul. They stand in causal relationships to one another, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this is where spiritual formation is understood much more deeply. Let's take the imagination. Can I imagine myself sleeping with this woman, maybe a coworker? Well, if I can imagine that, if I can see myself doing that, and I might then have a desire for that to actually become the reality, I can then choose, which is in another faculty we'll talk about, our volitional faculty. I can make a choice to pursue her and
Hmm.
drive there using another faculty of soul, the sensory faculty, which engages the body, so that I have drinks with her, and on and on and on. So, so the point is, our imagination, as it relates to these other faculties of the capacities of this faculty and others, are central to our moral choices and our actions accordingly. So that's just one example of how these different capacities within this faculty, the mental faculty, can affect one another and work together toward either our spiritual formation or our spiritual deformation. The second car, our emotional faculty. This is the ability to experience feelings, love, joy, grief, anticipation, and so on. Now, one thing to notice, and again, this is where a more rigorous, sophisticated understanding of the soul is going to make distinctions and is going to add a lot of nuance to this. People might say, well, yeah, I have emotions. Well, developing a more robust understanding is to say, okay, what are those, and how are they related to other aspects of soul? So in this case, emotions are always directed at an object. So I don't just love, I love my wife, Lori. I don't just grieve, I grieve my father's passing. I don't just anticipate, I anticipate my son's performance tonight. Okay, they're of or about something. They're intentional states, all right, that can lead to our flourishing or not flourishing. So as we direct our emotions toward the right objects, Augustine talked about this as being the rightly ordered loves. We love the right things in the right way, then we flourish.
Mm.
And so understanding the intentional nature, the intentionality that comes with feelings, helps us have proper emotions toward these things. So let me give you an example. I can, have a proper intention. That's a mental state toward loving my wife, and that will lead to proper desires. Well, I want to listen to her well. I want to be there for her when she's going through a struggle. I want to have a date night once a week, whatever it is. So I'm going to have then desires that I can choose to act on, my volitional capacity, to actually, okay, we're going to schedule Monday night. That's our date night. Or when you come home from work, I'm going to make sure I have time to sit down and listen to you. Whatever it is, and I can actually choose to do certain things, which then involves my body, involves what I do with my physical being. So, I could illustrate this in 100 ways, but that's one way. And notice that the causal connections go both ways, that people in the different cars can talk to and influence one another, right?
Mm.
So my emotional and mental faculties enter into these causal relationships, as I've illustrated. They cause me to make certain decisions, volitional capacity, and do certain things, and vice versa. And this is where counselors and pastoral care comes into play in terms of this is why it works. Because a counselor might realize, well, you have wrong beliefs about yourself. You see yourself as worthless. And because of that wrong belief, you have feelings of depression, and rightly so. And so the way to help those feelings become proper and healthy is to help you change your beliefs about what you are, that you are ultimately of great value and worth. See? So there's a causal connection there. I got three more cars. You want me to keep going?
I mean, I guess I'll just leave a really quick thought here,
Yeah.
but I definitely want to hit the other three cars. Is I can hear beneath everything that you're saying your emphasis on basically human flourishing, and I think that
Yeah.
that's so huge
Yeah.
because uh I mean, to give one funny example, I get ads every time I go on YouTube for, for BetterHelp,
Yep.
right? Online counseling
Right.
and I know that wouldn't be the case unless a lot of people were really struggling. And you
Yeah.
can, I mean, just walk out your front door and you can tell that a lot of people are struggling.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to highlight how practical a lot of what you're saying is, and how getting the the primary question, what is a human, wrong, can actually have really bad real world impact, and that a person, the answer isn't always just pharmacological, right? Like it's not just,
Absolutely. Right.
it's a brain mechanism problem, give them drugs. No, why do we need to do talk therapy? Why do we need healing? Why do we need confession? Why do we need these different things
Yeah.
if everything is just chemical in nature? And so I think that it's one of those funny things where I think some people, it's easy to fall into this trap of kind of accidentally talking out of two sides of our mouth, where on one hand, someone might even have a belief of, I'm a materialist, but on the other hand, it's like, yeah, okay, fine, but you need help. We
Right.
all need help. We all need to live like that's not true, even if you believe that it's true, which then should maybe cause you to question that maybe your beginning point isn't true, if
Right.
it's inadequate at actually helping you deal with the real problems in the real world. So
Right.
just one thought on that
Exactly.
I can hear beneath what you're saying is you have a care toward humanity, in the sense that we need the right tools and resources and understandings in order to be able to face the problems that we all do face as human beings.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the analogy I use is my wife and I visited Yosemite recently and saw the huge sequoias, and they're flourishing. They're spectacular, and they're flourishing because they're in the right type of soil with the right moisture and nutrients and amount of sunlight. All of the things in their environment is right for them to flourish. But if I took my dog and planted her right next to a sequoia, she's not going to flourish. And the reason is her nature is different than the nature of a sequoia, and it needs different things in its environment for her to flourish. So the question is, what are we? What is our essence, our nature? And therefore, how do we leverage that understanding to help our nature, these different faculties of our soul, have the things they need to flourish? And so that's why I'm going through this. This is what they are. We need to understand what the different faculties are, these different cars in the Ferris wheel, and how they interact with one another, the capacities in them also. So yeah, this is all deeply related. And when I get to the last faculty of soul, the sensory faculty, I'm going to want to make the point that no, medications are helpful. They're not the only story, but they're sometimes part of the stories. So I don't want to go the other extreme and say, yeah, that's irrelevant to what we are and how we flourish. So it's
You're saying
connect.
no comma. You're saying no comma medications are helpful, not no medications are helpful.
Thank you. Those comments are important. Yes. Yes. No comma.
I misheard you the first time. Yeah.
Yes,
So you're saying no, like medications actually are helpful. So let me ask you this.
We're incarnate beings. We have a body that's part of our soul's expression. I'll get to that in a minute, of how we flourish in the world.
Okay. So can I make sure I'm understanding you right, and that I'm going to lead into these last three for you to hit, but I want to make sure that you made a point a second ago, in case anyone in the audience has also misheard the way I did. So you're saying that these 6 components don't have a directionality to them. It's not first A, then B, then C. It can they're causally related, but that can happen in any particular order.
That's right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there's nuance, in some cases, one has to act before the other, right? So we have to have a belief that X is good before we do X. So there's a one-way causal street there. But on the other hand, what we choose to do will then also have implications perhaps on what we develop as a belief, because we might choose to do something and realize this was dumb. And so that causes us to have different beliefs that, I'm not going to do that again because that didn't work out so well.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I realize what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your Ferris wheel picture and I'm going to put a little text next to it so people can follow along. And as you hit it, I'll check it off so that people can keep track of this as we're mapping it out. So, you've got 3. So feel free to dive into the last 3. I don't want to take away your your airtime here. Go
Oh,
for it.
no worries. No, really good. I appreciate the interaction. So the third, again, no particular order, the third of car that you filled up as the operator of this imaginary Ferris wheel is the volitional faculty. Definition: it's our ability to act freely in order to reach certain goals or ends, uh, causally connected to others, for instance. And we could give examples all day long. So I'm just cherry picking a few here, right? Um, but our choices are influenced by what we believe. If we think something is true, a mental faculty capacity to have a belief. So we believe something is true, and then that leads us to choose to pursue that. Our emotions are involved as well. This is what advertisers leverage, right? They know that there are these causal connections between our mental, our emotional, and our volitional faculties. They know we have an emotional need to feel good about ourselves. They know that if they tell us that if we want to, that if we buy this car, others will think we're successful, which feeds our mental faculty of this desire to have others think well of us, and that leads us to make a choice to go out and buy this car, our volitional faculty. So one example how they're interrelated and can be used for our good or our ill.
This is also what news organizations prey upon within human nature. And this is why people distrust the mainstream media more than they ever have before. But imagine a tool that actually allows you to quickly analyze alternative perspectives to take a more independent approach to understanding news narratives. Well, that's where Ground News comes into play. It's an app and website that gathers related news into one place to show readers the full spectrum of perspectives on current events. So here would be an example of a story I found on Ground News. Thousands of Christians deliberately targeted and killed in Nigeria, new report says. And for this story, it gives me the following breakdown. Out of 14 sources that covered this story, 0 were from left-leaning outlets, making this a blind spot for the left. I can see a visual breakdown of the biased distribution, which shows 91% of this coverage was from right-leaning sources. Now, if you scroll down the page here further, you can actually see the reporting outlets, their individual bias rating. You can easily compare headlines. You can take a look at this article, for example, by the Daily Wire, or this other article by catholicworld.com. And by comparing headlines, you can actually broaden your perspective and see where certain reports have actually fallen short. And this brings to light one of my favorite tools on Ground News, which is the blind spot feature. A blind spot in a story is when there's a disproportionate coverage by one side of the political spectrum. If you're interested in this type of thing, go to ground.news/DDW or scan my QR code that you should be seeing somewhere on this screen. My viewers will get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use to do this type of investigation. I find it to be very helpful, again, to get to the bottom of things more quickly. Go check out Ground News in the description, and let's get back into the interview.
Fourth car, social faculty. Our ability to relate to other persons, because we don't live on an island. We have everyday engagements like this, and that social faculty allows us to do that either well or not so well. Again, related to every other faculty. Who we hang out with, it's going to influence what we believe, what we desire, the choices we make, the emotions we have, and so on, and vice versa. Certain beliefs might lead us to decide to hang out with certain people, not certain people. So again, mental faculty using our volitional faculty to decide how our social faculty is engaging. And then a very special type of social relationship that really is its own faculty is the spiritual faculty. Fifth car. It's simply our ability to relate to and have intimacy with God. And I'd say engage other spiritual realities as well, angels, whatnot. But let's think mostly about having the ability to call God our Father or Abba Father, right? Mm-hmm. That has deep connections to other faculties of the soul. This is what we talk about in negative terms as the hardening of our hearts. How our intimacy with God can be hindered by what we think, believe, and desire. We have wrong thoughts about God. We don't see him as he truly is. We believe he does not have our best in mind. We desire other things more than him, mental faculty capacities. Our emotions of love are disordered. So we love other things more than God, and that affects the flourishing and exercising of our spiritual capacity. Uh, we have experiences through our sensory faculty. Uh, we might expose ourselves to pornography, and that has an effect on our spiritual faculty. Or our spiritual faculty might be such that we say, yeah, we aren't interested in engaging our sensory faculty to look at that. And that could have positive influence on our spiritual faculty. Our choices, again, volitional faculty, those we're around, our social faculty, either lead to a hardening of our hearts or the softening of our hearts, the flourishing of our spiritual faculty. So again, just a couple examples, but so we're understanding the nature of the soul and these faculties aids in our spiritual
Mhm.
formation.
I think one thing that's super interesting about this is that it begins to give an answer to a question that I hear a lot from atheists and from people who don't really believe in God or the spiritual realm at all. And it's, us believers um, understand and feel that God loves us. And yet, I personally have never heard an audible voice. And I think it's really interesting because it kind of helps separate the components of what you're describing,
Yeah.
where, to use another analogy, if I got a text message from my wife that says I love you when I'm away on a trip or something, that message came in through the phone. That was the apparatus
Sure.
of the
It's
message,
the medium.
of the information,
Yeah.
the medium.
Hmm.
And then also my eyes were another layer of the medium, and then my brain was another layer of the medium. But ultimately, that message lands somewhere other than any of those mediums,
Right.
and it gets right into I don't know what the right word would be, my soul, my spirit, my heart, but it gets somewhere beyond any of those mechanisms or mediums. And my belief, and again, you're the expert here, so tell me if this is Orthodox Christianity or not, but is that basically God can, as an immaterial being, get that message into its final destination apart from either using a phone or using an audible voice. It doesn't have to go in through the bones of our ears or necessarily even in through our eyes. He can, through prayer, basically communicate that message directly into the human heart. And it's not just that one message of I love you, but if that makes sense, like it kind of separates the medium or the mechanism from the meaning and the message.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm barking up the right tree here or not,
No,
but
you sure are. In other words, and this is where we'll get in that last faculty, the sensory faculty, how we do access things through the physical world, where we hear things or we see things, but not all of our knowledge comes through that faculty. Some of our knowledge comes from other faculties apart from that faculty, and this would be through our mental faculty and our spiritual faculty, hearing the voice of God, for instance. But more broadly, this is actually what Dallas Willard did his dissertation on. It's this idea, it's known as phenomenology, that we can have knowledge of things by being aware of our inner reality apart from the empirical. Not to say there isn't empirical knowledge also. I'm seeing you now, and that's mediated through my eyes. But there is knowledge we can have apart from that. We don't have to say, if I can't see it, it isn't real or it can't be known. That was his dissertation, and drawing heavily on Husserl. It was really helpful. So let me go into that last car, that physical
yes.
faculty, if you will, or the sensory faculty, better said.
Yep.
So our soul, now I'm being very careful in how I say this, and I unpack this one whole chapter. So I take one chapter to talk about the first 5 faculties. I take another chapter to just deal with this 6th faculty, the faculty of sensation, okay, because it's how the soul and the body connect. And it's a different view than we often hear, especially post-Reformation. It's a view that draws heavily on Aristotle through Thomas Aquinas, and then articulated by some Protestants like Dallas Willard and J.P. Moreland and C.S. Lewis. But it doesn't tend to be the predominant view we've had since the Enlightenment. And I I'd like to see that corrected. And we can talk about that. And we can talk about what
Hmm.
these views are named. But the point is, on this view, the sixth faculty is the sensory faculty. So our soul has the capacity to experience smells, uh, have tactile experiences, the feeling of something, to taste things, to hear things, and see things in order to interact in appropriate ways with the world and therefore flourish as incarnate beings. Okay. These are sensations. These are the conscious awarenesses we have of physical things or things in the world. Because it's very important. So the smell is not identical to what's happening in my nose. Just like sound is not identical to what's on that CD, but it's correlated,
Hmm.
right? We use our nose to smell. We use our eye to see. But
Hmm.
it's the soul that has the experience, that has the phenomenal, this is the idea of a phenomenon, an experience, a direct awareness of this smell that is mediated through the bodily organs we have. So the way JP says it is that the body is an ensouled, spatially extended physical structure that the soul uses to access and flourish in the world. Okay, so it's the soul that actually forms the body to, the technical term is realize or express or be able to exemplify these capacities, the capacity to see, hear, smell, and so on and so forth. So the soul has to form a body that can allow that type of access. And so the way one author says it is that the soul's kind of like a vacuum cleaner, runs around and sucks up parts, atoms, and sticks them together and creates DNA molecules, and through that, finally creates the body around itself. It's not a spatial around, but around itself, so it can engage the world in these ways. So let me give you an example of how this influences our spiritual formation. Uh, Fasting uh, is a bodily practice, something we do where we abstain from something for the nourishment or the health or the flourishing of our soul. So it's something we do in our body, our physical uh, faculty, that has causal connections to our spiritual faculty. Okay. Uh, or resisting the temptation to lust, to look at a woman, is fasting from that. So the mental faculty is involved. It provides reasons we shouldn't do that. We don't think it's healthy for us or for our marriage. Our volitional capacity steps up to the plate and gets involved. And it says, yeah, I'm going to choose to act on what I know is right and not look. Uh, and actually, over time, we find that therefore there's a causal connection back to our mental faculty, and we have less and less of an inclination or a disposition or a desire to look. So that's that causal loop. But in the instance, our volitional faculty says, yeah, I'm going to act on that and turn, not look away, avert my eyes, which then has repercussion in our body. We physically turn or we look elsewhere, whatever, right? Doesn't let those sensations in. Ultimately, it has an implication for our spiritual faculty. We flourish. We have more intimacy with God. So again, that's just one example, but that's where Dallas spent a lot of time talking about the spiritual disciplines, how these things we do in our bodies have a connection, a direct causal connection to the state and the well-being of our soul. So here's a way you might say it. As we understand the nature of our faculties, the capacities that they contain, how those capacities relate to one another and to capacities of other faculties, we increasingly, if we leverage this knowledge, will believe more true things, will desire more good things, will imagine more right things, we will feel more appropriate things, we will love more godly things, so we will choose more healthy things. Ultimately, we will be formed into the type of people we want to be and God's designed us to be, who fully flourish in this life and in the life to come.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you might also enjoy the Wisdom Society, a growing community of believers from around the world that meets weekly to discuss tough questions, to read scripture, and to pray. Within the Wisdom Society, there is also a book club where members are joined by the author of the book so that they can discuss the book directly with the author. Join today, support this channel, invest in yourself, grow in faith, connect with believers from around the world. Click the link in the description to find out more.